And to assess the government's boost to pensions for many, but not all, I'm joined now by Claire Martin, former NT Chief Minister and now Chief Executive of the Australian Council for Social Service. Claire Martin, ACOS's immediate response to the totality of the pension situation.
I think every Australian was aware that aged pensioners and other pensioners were really struggling on $285 a week. So totally welcome the fact that pensions have risen for $32.50 for a single. And I think it shows a level of real understanding from the government about the lives of pensioners, and also I think a level of compassion. What I don't understand is why sole pensioners weren't included and why there wasn't some look at the rate of unemployment benefit. And what you've got now is almost $100 between a single unemployed person's benefit and an aged pensioner. And I really don't understand why that difference has been left.
Sole pensioners, single parent pensioners?
The sole parents have been left behind, and certainly unemployed who are on a very low rate of allowance, which is $226.65 a week, or the youth allowance, have been left way behind. So as unemployment grows in Australia, we've got more Australians being left on a very unsustainably low allowance and will really struggle to survive.
Claire Martin, thank you for that brief picture. And later we'll hear from Shadow Treasurer Joe Hockey, but first we're joined by Treasurer Wayne Swan, fresh from delivering his budget speech. Wayne Swan, where is the horror in the horror budget? Where is serious pain going to be felt? Where are the tough decisions beyond hitting the wealthy?
Well, I heard the commentary earlier, and I certainly do reject the notion that we haven't taken some tough decisions, and some long-term structural savings in the budget have been put in place, and they do involve political pain. Just take pensions, retirement incomes, just take the lifting of the retirement age, just take the other savings that we've found in superannuation, particularly
but the lifting in retirement age, for one, you're talking about phasing in up to 2023.
Yes, of course we are, because people make their plans.
The next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6
Kerry,
years.
could I just explain what we've done here, particularly when it comes to pensions, because I think it's very important. What we've concentrated on doing is offsetting that very big structural change to our budget, which is going to become a very big long-term expense because we've just increased the base rate of the pension precisely at the time that the demographic time bomb is working, and that is going to cost us a lot over time. What we concentrated on doing in the budget was to offset that spend out into the future by structural saves. Structural saves in health, particularly when you look at the private health insurance rebate, structural saves in the pension system, structural saves in the family payment system, and other savings elsewhere in the tax system. We have offset all new expenditure here by the last year of the Ford estimates, and we've done all of that with a $210 billion write-down on revenue. This has been a very difficult budget to put in place, and we've got on ourselves some very strict budget rules which go out into the future. When growth returns to trend, what we've said is we're going to have a cap, a real cap of 2% on new spending, and given the ageing of the population, that's something that's very difficult to do as well.
But that's never territory.
It is not never
territory.
In terms
of the next 2-3 years.
It is not never territory. At the moment, we've got a complex task on our hand. The first thing that we have to do is to stimulate the economy, to support jobs, put investment in place for nation building to support the productive capacity of this economy into the future, and most of that spending comes from the investment funds that we created last year. The money was unallocated. It has now been allocated, and we've made structural saves elsewhere in the budget to take into account the fact that we've increased pensions. And I reckon, given the recent history in this country, they are very substantial achievements.
Treasury is forecasting a balanced budget in 2014-15. That's just 5 years. But based on a leap in economic growth from -0.5% next financial year to 4.5% growth 2 years later, and the same again the following year.
I was listening to that commentary earlier
heroic
as well.
assumptions, aren't they, when you keep telling us we're in uncharted waters?
There is a very detailed discussion of the Treasury projections in the budget papers, and it makes a number of points. The main point that it makes is that the Treasury projections for those 2 years are very conservative compared to what has happened in this country in the past 2 recessions, in the 80s and in the 90s. And it also makes the point, zero growth last year, -0.5 this year, and 2.25 the year after. That's a 3-year period.
And then it doubles the next year.
Well, of course.
And stays
Kerry,
at boom levels, what are essentially boom levels the following year.
No, they are not boom levels, and recessions do end. And because there is spare capacity in the system, you do get a pretty quick uptick in growth. And the uptick in growth that they have forecast is not of the level that occurred in the 80s or the 90s. They have been very conservative.
But you can't have a real basis for confidence that the recovery this time can automatically be assumed to be like the 80s or the 90s, because we constantly are being told this is uncharted territory. We're hearing all kinds of predictions about how slow the recovery is going to be.
Kerry, I believe those forecasts and projections are extremely realistic. They are conservative.
But based on past history, not the here and now.
Well, Kerry...
Are these uncharted waters or not?
Kerry,
are we in the unknown or not?
We have lived through extraordinary times, but as Glenn Stevens said in a speech only a week and a half ago, recessions do end. And we will have been through a period where growth for 3 years has been below trend. So for the Treasury to put in place those projections, the way in which they have, I think is credible, I think it's realistic, and I think, based on my experiences internationally, entirely realistic.
But you are again making assumptions. This is theoretical, and I'll say again, this is a recession like none that you or I or people our age have experienced.
We understand that. That's why we have put in place very strong stimulus. We moved early when we became aware of the first contraction in the December quarter. We moved again early when we had the contraction in the March quarter. We have moved all the way through, making sure that we provide the support for jobs in this economy and businesses. And in the middle of that, we've had a record write-down in revenues of $210 billion over the forward estimates. So the deficits you're talking about are primarily the result of revenue write-downs. And what we have to do is chart a path back to surplus. And we have done that with conservative projections in this budget, and it is entirely credible.
And why shouldn't we be alarmed at the prospect of your borrowing limits going beyond $300 billion?
Well, Kerry, because if we were not borrowing in these circumstances, the budget I would be presenting at the moment, caused by the revenue write-down, would be either savagely cutting services or dramatically putting up taxes, and what that would be doing would be to deepen the recession and to lengthen the recession. There is no choice. It is entirely the responsible thing to do at the moment, which is why we have spent so much time and effort in the budget charting the course back to surplus.
You're selling your infrastructure spending as part of your long-term stimulus response to the global crisis. But isn't this just the nation-building infrastructure, substantial though it was, that you promised before the last election and set funding aside for in the last budget before you knew the crisis was coming? But you're kind of gilding the lily a bit, aren't you?
Not at all. I mean, infrastructure, by definition, critical economic infrastructure, by definition, requires planning and preparation.
But how much of the spending is new spending, genuinely new spending, not already foreshadowed last year?
It is monies allocated put aside last year, and we have now been through the Infrastructure Australia process, and we've allocated them to projects.
But isn't it a little bit dishonest
to
be suggesting that this is in response to the global crisis when you had foreshadowed it and put money aside before the crisis was on you?
Kerry, I know what people would have been saying if we tried to spend it last year. They would have said the projects weren't properly prepared, or that the economy was fully employed and we shouldn't have been spending the money. Now is the ideal time to invest in nation building for recovery, which is why we've put together such a big package. If the economy was in a different state at the moment, we would not be spending as much on infrastructure. But we're doing it precisely because it is the third phase of our stimulus, and it puts in place a gaping hole in our economy that was left there by the previous government, who refused to partner with the states and the private sector in putting in place critical economic infrastructure.
Why nothing from a Labor government for sole parent pensioners?
Well, because sole parent pensioners are the recipients of very generous family payments, which have been increased, and they've also been the recipients of further payments that have come through our stimulus packages.
So they're reasonably off?
No, they're not reasonably off, but the Harmer Review had a look at the pension system across the board, and it did not recommend that we increase the base rate of the single parent payment. They didn't recommend that at all. I'm making the point that through the family payment system, there is more assistance to those people than there is to pensioners. What we concentrated on here was the base rate of pension for someone living on their own, which has been found to be completely and utterly inadequate. And if we would have done more, then you would have been sitting here asking me why we hadn't cut harder to pay for that.
Well, we're out of time, and we'll have time for more questions as these next few weeks unfold. Wayne Swan, thanks very much for talking with us.
Good to be with you.
We're playing musical chairs tonight, so bear with us as the Shadow Treasurer, Joe Hockey, joins me to elaborate on the opposition.